Well, it's good to see all of you guys. Merry Christmas. One of the things that we have been in, actually started this last Sunday. If you were here this last Sunday, you kind of know where we're going. We talked about how we're going to be talking actually about Christmas and this certain stories that just come out of Christmas. And more than just a series that's going to be talking about the normal Christmas things, what I'm going to be trying to do, the reason why we're calling it Christmas Stories is we started on Sunday, we'll continue tonight, we'll end tomorrow, just kind of giving some narratives, hopefully a new voice and a new kind of perspective, because Christmas is a pretty familiar story. And so we're trying to take a different angle and just kind of share it even as a sermon, kind of as a narrative. Because isn't it true that we all love stories? I mean, all of us are drawn into a good story. Whether that's a story on television, whether that's a movie or a good book, maybe it's sitting around the campfire. Everyone loves a really good story. And like the Christmas story, well, there's always a cast of characters, right? And so I want to see if you even are familiar with the cast of characters in the Christmas story. I'm going to show you a picture. It's going to be just a normal classic nativity scene, and there's going to be arrows pointed at different individuals, and you just shout out who these people are. You guys up for this? This is a really, really simple game. I think you guys are going to ace it, but are you guys ready for it? Okay, you guys are ready. Let's see that first picture. Okay, who is that? I think everyone said Joseph, but I heard something else. I'm not sure what I heard. It was not Mary. Mary may be coming, but that one I think is Joseph. All right, next one. All right, who are those guys? Shepherds. I feel like someone is shouting out other answers, and I'm not quite hearing them. Is that Garrett? Is Garrett making jokes over there? He's like, that's the Hamburglar. That's who that is. All right, next. All right, who are these guys? Wise men. Next one. Who's that? That is Camry, the camel. Yeah, don't know this, but Matthew actually talks about the wise men rolling up on their Camry. Okay. No, that's just a really bad camel joke, and it's going to get better. The jokes won't, but we'll get better. Okay, next one. Who's that? Mary. And then last, who do we have? Baby Jesus. All right, so you guys know kind of the familiar characters of Christmas. And when you look at this nativity, I think it's missing a key character of the Christmas story. Because anytime any of you have done creative writing, you know that every story has to have some sort of conflict in it. It needs to have a conflict because that's the drama. That's what draws us in. And one of the easiest ways to actually create conflict in a story is introducing a villain. And in this classic, nativity scene, there is no villain. Now, there's plenty of drama. The drama might be, okay, where are Mary and Joseph going to stay? My goodness, who is the doctor that's going to deliver this child? I mean, there's all kinds of drama. But in that picture, there is no villain. But anyone who is familiar with the Christmas story, you guys know there's a villain, right? Who's the villain of Christmas? No, it is not the Grinch. Some of you might have been going that direction. And it's not even Burgermeister Meisterburger, right? Who is the villain of Christmas? King Herod. You guys know it. Who is King Herod? We're going to unpack this a little bit because today we are focusing on the villain of Christmas because I think there's a little bit of King Herod in every single one of us. And we'll explore how that is the case in a moment. But who is King Herod? Well, he is the client king of Judea. Now, what does it mean to be a client king? It means he doesn't really have all the power. In fact, he's only given the power. Why? Well, Rome is the one who is in power. They're the ones who are in control, and they've given him a small part of their empire to say, yeah, you can rule over it. Here's the thing. Herod is not even Jewish. In fact, this drove the Jewish people in Judea crazy. He's not even Jewish, but he is very politically savvy, very astute, extremely intelligent, and he just has this drive in him. In fact, it's his drive, it's his ambition that probably gets him in trouble in the first place. It's this ambition that probably we can relate to the most, because how many times does our ambition, our kingdom, personal kingdom building, get us in trouble, particularly when it gets us into odds with really what God is wanting to do in his kingdom. So let me give you just a snapshot of his ambition. This is one of my favorite stories that is a little known story. If you're a historian and you really enjoy history, you may be familiar with it. But how many of you guys at least recognize the name Julius Caesar? Okay, most of you probably recognize the name Julius Caesar. You paid enough attention in history class to know this one. But in 44 BC, Julius Caesar is trying to basically have a power grab. Rome is a republic. That means there is no one central king in the Roman Empire. but Julius Caesar would like to be king. The Senate does not want him to be king. And so 44 BC, the Senate, pretty much led by Brutus, that name might be familiar to some of you, they lead this assassination attempt of Julius Caesar. And on the 15th of March, anyone recognize the phrase, the Ides of March, right? So Brutus and these senators, they come and they stab Julius Caesar 23 times, putting him to death. Now, this assassination attempt is a huge deal. It's actually a turning point in the Roman Empire. And one of the reasons why it's a turning point is because Julius Caesar's nephew, a guy by the name of Octavius, he actually has a name change later. We'll talk about that in a moment. Octavius and his good friend Mark Antony decide, we're going to dispense justice. We're going to bring these perpetrators to justice. What is their form of justice? Well, it's hunting down and basically murdering and taking power from these senators. And so with their legions of military Roman soldiers, they go out and they begin to dispense this justice. But everyone kind of knows, at some point, these two individuals, they're going to face one another. Because as each one is growing in power, each one has a military victory here and there, there's only room for one top dog in Rome. And so these guys are probably going to come to head at some point. Now, this is where Herod comes into the picture. Herod is this client king of Rome in Judea, and he sides with Mark Antony. He sides with Mark Antony most likely because of geographically, it just made sense. Because Mark Antony is married to a very famous Egyptian woman named Cleopatra. Some of you paid attention in history class. Very good. And if you know anything about geography, well, Judea is right next to Egypt. And so what does he do? He lavishes all kinds of gifts on Mark Antony, all kinds of gifts on Cleopatra, invites them to these parties, always rolling out the red carpet. He actually funded a rebellion that took place in Alexandria, Egypt. And so we have this idea that, okay, if I can put all my eggs in the right basket, man, when this comes to head and Mark Antony wins, I'm going to be in a great spot politically. Unfortunately, for Herod, when these two men eventually come to a head, Mark Antony is defeated, and soundly. And what ends up taking place is Octavius has a name change that you probably are familiar with, particularly if you're familiar with the Christmas story. He changes his name to Caesar, anyone know? Augustus. Caesar Augustus becomes the very first king, the very first emperor of Rome. Before that, it was a republic. Rome wanted a republic. Well, Augustus changes all of that. And so we have a very precarious position for King Herod. King Herod realizes, okay, at some point, they're going to turn their attention to me because I sided with the enemy, and I'm going to be removed from power or worse. And so he's got a few options at his disposal. He can go ahead and kill himself now, because that's probably what Rome is going to do to him. But he doesn't really like that option. He wants to go on living. And so he goes, okay, well, what's another plan? Maybe I could run for it. I could just grab as much wealth as possible and go into hiding, live under the radar as best I can. But eventually they're probably going to find me. Okay, I don't really like that idea. And there's a third option. He could just kind of go through, the status quo, act like it's no big deal. No, we weren't friends. No, Mark Antony, Cleopatra, acquaintances at best. But he knows Augustus is smarter than that. And so he actually has this really big gamble. He goes on a limb and he decides to just go and gamble big. And he travels to the island of Rhodes. And the island of Rhodes is actually where Augustus is headquartered at the time. And he basically knocks on the door unannounced. And he says, I would like an audience with Augustus. And everyone's like, what are you doing here? Like, we were going to come after you, but you've made our job really easy. What are you doing here? And Augustus hears about this, and he says, okay, go ahead and bring Herod in. And so in front of everyone, Herod gives this very eloquent speech that goes something like this. He says, in essence, King Herod says, Augustus, you know that I supported your enemy, Mark Antony. And Augustus is saying, yeah, that's why we're all really curious as to why you're even here. You know that I supported your enemy, Mark Antony. And I supported him before the Civil War. I supported him during the Civil War. I supported him right up to the very end. Which means you know that when I pledge my allegiance to somebody, it actually means something. And so today, great Caesar Augustus, I pledge myself to you. And Augustus is so impressed by this. Not only does he allow him to continue to be the king of Judea, he actually gives him Samaria, he gives him Jericho and Gaza as well to also rule. And he sends him on his way. This is the ambitious Herod. Herod, who's able to control these outcomes. But it's this ambition that eventually gets him into trouble. We see that this is a man who ends up changing his will multiple times. This is a man who has 10 wives and 13 sons from these different wives. And no sooner does he choose one of his sons to be the next king, then paranoia just kind of creeps into his heart, and he realizes, oh man, this son might actually kill me before I'm actually dead. So he actually kills his sons before they can do him in. Now, whether or not they had that ambition or not, we'll never know. He does this actually to 3 different sons. You can imagine if you were one of the 10 remaining, you're like, Dad, just like take me out of the will right here, right now. Not interested, right? If it means saving my life, I'm not interested. This is a man who, if you were any sort of Jewish nobleman, if you were someone of authority, if you were somebody, even a rabbi who was gaining too much popularity in the city of Jerusalem, he'd just have you killed. He'd have you executed. He would just eliminate. You would just disappear. So no one even wanted to actually have any position of power in Jerusalem during Herod's day because that probably meant a death sentence. So keep that in mind. This is the climate that Jesus is born into. Right? Jesus is born about 5 miles from Jerusalem in a town of Bethlehem. And at this point, this new king that has actually been presented there by God, well, he's probably learning to walk about this time. And if you have your Bibles, this is where we're going to pick up the narrative. And this is going to be in Matthew chapter 2 is where we're going to spend most of our time tonight. In Matthew chapter 2, we're going to start reading in verse 1. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. So just picture the scene. We've got a group of travelers, important travelers, wealthy travelers, and they show up in Jerusalem, and what are they saying? They're saying all the wrong things. I mean, can you imagine people hearing these guys say, hey, where's the king? Oh, yeah, no, it's Herod. He's over here. No, not Herod. We saw the star, and there's a new king. Everyone's just like, shh, be quiet. Don't you know better? Don't talk like that. It continues, verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Now that you know a little bit of the backstory on Herod, are any of you surprised while all of Jerusalem might be a little disturbed by these guys coming and stirring up these type of rumors? Verse 4. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. So if you were one of those religious leaders that were called to give answers, this is a tough spot to be in because you don't know what's going to set him off. If you lie, well, you're going to get in trouble. If you tell the truth, you might get in trouble. So they just kind of explain, this is the truth. In Bethlehem, in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophets have written. And we don't know this for sure, but I have to imagine that these folks are kind of annoyed even with that question because it's one of those questions that everybody knows the answer to. It's one of those things that in the back of their mind, they're probably thinking, are you kidding me? Like, you're asking us this question? You're supposed to be the king of the Jews. Every Jewish person knows the answer to that question. Even our children know the answer because this is a prophecy that everybody knows. You really don't know this? Okay, let me read to you the prophecy. And that's what they do. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And so this is not at all what Herod wants to hear. Like, this is bad news for Herod. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose
went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
So these very important individuals from the East, wealthy individuals, they finally find this child. We don't know exactly how old he is, but he's probably not the infant just born. And he probably looks no stronger, probably looks no more attractive than any normal child at his age. But what are they compelled to do? To bend their knees and to worship. Yet probably just 5 miles away, Herod, who at this time in his life, he's probably about 70 years old, he's suffering from a very painful kidney disease, a kidney disease that will eventually take his life. What is he doing? He's wringing his hands. He's wringing his hands wondering, okay, I wonder if they found him. Has anyone seen them? Has anyone heard from these guys? As soon as you hear anything, let me know. But never once does Herod even consider going and bending his knees to anyone or anything. And again, I think this might be where there's a little bit of King Herod in all of us. I mean, how many times do we go before God and we just ask for our personal kingdom to be built stronger? I mean, we don't say it quite in those words, but how many times do we pray prayers of, God, this is what I want, this is what I really need, you need to come through for me for X, Y, and Z. But then when it really comes down to total surrender, complete obedience over all things, no questions asked, I mean, isn't it true that we all balk just a little bit to that type of surrender? See, I think we have a little bit of Herod in us. Verse 12, and having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt. So there's a little bit of drama now, isn't there? Like there's a little bit of tension, a little bit of conflict. And if we weren't really, really familiar with this story, I think some of us would be on the edge of our seat. What's going to happen? Like, is Herod going to track them down? Is he going to kill them? What's going to happen? Well, let's find out. Verse 16. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. Of course he was furious. I mean, just think about for a moment who Herod is. This is an individual who is always the one who's controlling outcomes. I mean, even when his back was against the wall, he's been painted into a corner. He had sided with Mark Antony, the enemy. He was able to control the outcomes. He was so politically astute that he was able to navigate and negotiate, and sure enough, not only is he still in power, but he has more power. And so even now, as he's thinking through this, he's not thinking, they tricked me, shucks. No, his thinking is, no one outplays me. You know what I've got up my sleeve? I've got the nuclear option, and I'm about to press the nuclear option. And so at this point, he gives an order that as we think about it in our minds today, we think there is no way anyone would actually carry out an order like this. Again, verse 16. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. And so we've got this fateful day where a group of soldiers enters a town of Bethlehem, and they enter homes and they take out children. They take out boys who are 2 years and younger, and what do? They murder them right in front of their moms and their dads. And if moms and dads try to resist, if families try to resist, they too are cut down. This is a man who's used to controlling outcomes, and he'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants. All right, so soon, probably within the next year, Herod actually dies. And like I said a second ago, he dies from this really painful kidney disease. It was such a painful disease that he actually tried to take his own life at one point.
It was so painful that he's in the process of trying to commit suicide when a cousin enters the room and stops him from doing so. But eventually, this disease does catch up to him. But before it does, he has another order, one last sinister order to carry out. And the order is to round up several hundred of the most prominent Jewish men and actually put them into prison. And the order is, as soon as I die, I want all of these men to be executed. Why? What kind of sicko would do something like this? Well, someone who realized that he was so unloved, so hated in Jerusalem, that there would be a party, a celebration on his death. And so in order for there still to be mourning on the day that he died, that was his plan. And sure enough, he eventually dies. And when he does, the order is completely ignored. And so fortunately, these families receive their husbands and their sons back, and there is this big sigh of relief. Finally, Herod has died. But even today, Herod is known. Like, we're talking about Herod right now. In fact, in some circles, very small circles, he is still known as someone who gave at least a little something positive to the world that we know. In fact, one of the things that he was known for was his building projects. He actually had the name, the title of Herod the Builder. And the reason why he had this title is because his desire was for his name to always be known. That he wanted to actually have a name that would last not just a few decades, but hundreds, maybe even thousands of years into the future. So how did he try to accomplish this? Building projects. In fact, we've got a slide. It's going to be back a little ways, so Tina, if you want to find that, you can. But some of the building projects that he undertook were these massive palaces. We've got an example of one of those palaces on the top right. That's one of his palaces, or at least a reconstruction of what that looked like. Down below, we actually have a palace fortress. This is Masada. You can actually go and visit the ruins of Masada. This was one of the last strongholds of a small group of Jewish people after 70 AD when Rome came and destroyed Jerusalem when the Jews tried to rebel. Over here on the left bottom, this is actually his tomb. This is Herod's tomb, and they've recently found it and excavated it. And then, of course, the upper left picture, this is what? You guys know? It's a temple. It's a temple in Jerusalem. This is probably the most noteworthy of his building projects. And his whole thought process, his whole mindset was, okay, I'm not going to live but maybe 70, 80 years. But stone, brick, mortar, it lasts a long, long time. And so maybe if those buildings remain, my name will still be known. And to this day, there's small groups of people that actually know Herod as Herod the Builder. And they still talk about the academics of what he did and what he accomplished. But that's a very, very small percentage of the population. But Herod is known. In fact, can you imagine telling Herod, maybe having a conversation with Herod near the end of his life that would go something like this: hey, Herod, I got good news for you. The good news is that you will be known and you will be talked about. Over 2,000 years now, people will still know your name and they'll still be speaking about you. In fact, people will gather in buildings. They will sit in rows and they will actually know and hear your name spoken. What would Herod say? Oh, fantastic. That's everything I wanted. And you'd have to lean in and say, well, probably not. Not exactly. What do you mean, not exactly? Well, Herod, you're actually just going to be a B character in a much greater story. You're going to be this minor sidebar. You're going to be this footnote in a huge story. A story of a boy who was born. A story of a boy who became a king, who actually became the savior of the world. And people will not remember you as Herod the Builder. They will know you as Herod the Butcher. And what's really ironic about this Herod is he was just 5 miles away. 5 miles away, and you had the opportunity to actually be ushered in to a kingdom without an end. But instead, you decided with your own ambition that you were going to make a kingdom for yourself, and it didn't work out so well. They'll know your name, but not for the reasons why you want them to. And so we'll fast forward now about 80 years from these events. About 80 years, Herod is long gone. Jesus has come. He's lived. He's ministered. He's served. He's been crucified. He's been risen from the dead, and he's ascended into heaven. 80 years, most of those people that we saw in the nativity scene a second ago, they're long dead as well, maybe all of them. And it's the Apostle John. John who walked with Jesus. John who spent time taking care of Mary. John who heard the stories of Jesus' birth narrative. John who was ministered to by Mary, who knew all these things, tried to summarize the implications of what Jesus' birth means to humanity in the moment and also for the future. And I think he summarizes it really, really well. If you could, go ahead and turn to John chapter 1. In John chapter 1, I'm going to read to you verse 4. It says, in him, in who? In Jesus. In him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. At this point, he's just talking in the past tense. You guys catch that? He's saying, okay, this light, it's for Jewish people, but it's also for Gentile people. And he's talking about this in the past tense, but then he's going to shift in the next verse, and he's going to be talking about it in the present tense. There's victory and there's blessing right here, right now. What does he say in verse 5? He says, the light shines in the darkness. And this is the Apostle John who knew how dark the world could get. Right? He saw the crucified king. He knew how dark life in the world could get because he heard and he knew about the destruction of Jerusalem. He knew that the temple was destroyed. He knew that Rome was still in power. He was feeling the weight of their dominant, oppressive hand because he is now exiled onto an island. He knows how dark the world can get. But what does he say about life in Jesus? He says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Darkness has not blown out this light. Darkness has not snuffed out this light. And so really now it comes down to our story. And how are we going to relate to the light of the world? Because Herod had an opportunity. Herod had an opportunity to actually partner with life and light. But what does he do? Well, he resists it. And so that's an option. Like, how are we going to relate to the light of the world? Are we going to resist it, or are we going to worship the light and the light of the world? Are we going to be like Herod and continue just to build our own personal kingdoms? Or are we going to surrender and say, I want to be a part of a kingdom without an end? A king, to worship a king who conquers sin and death and brings unity and peace to the world. Do I want to have a kingdom? Am I going to relate to Jesus and say, my will be done? Or am I going to actually have a story that says, thy will be done? You know, without Christ, and I think I could speak for so many of you in this room, without Jesus, isn't it true that we'd just be stumbling through the dark? I mean, in our world, we'd just be stumbling, trying to make one choice, clumsy decision after the other. But what do we see? I'm just going to read these words one more time. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. What do we know? We know that Jesus came. He came as the light to a very dark world. And when we put our faith in this light of the world, what do we know? We experience life and life to